Hey, it's Trip. Uh, I guess it's been quite some time since we last saw you. But Grace and I thought it would be really, really great to see you tonight. For you to come over or something. Yeah. How about 8 o'clock or something? That'd be really nice. Can't wait to see you.
Façade is one of the most unique and novel games of its kind, a real-time interactive drama where players communicate directly with non-player actors in a short dramatic scenario. While over 15 years old, this game is one of the rare cases of an academic research project that achieved global status and popularity. With exposure in the mainstream press, award recognition, and a cult status on the internet as popular YouTubers run Let's Plays through its quirky and occasionally awkward drama. I'm Tommy Thompson, and in this episode of AI in Games, we're going to take a look at how Façade works, the years of research and development required to make it happen, and how every layer of the game's AI systems had to be invented in order to make it work.
Well, Sam, maybe you've already had a drink or two on the way over here. I don't know.
In Façade, players are invited to the apartment of Grace and Trip, a married couple who met courtesy of the player character back in college. However, things aren't going so well in their relationship, and your coming round for drinks that evening is the make or break moment for their marriage. You are unwittingly dragged into passive-aggressive psychological head games as the couple lash out at one another about their hobbies, their career choices, their families, their sex life, and much more. Players interact with the couple by wandering through their apartment and interacting with objects and furniture around the house, or by chatting with them directly. What makes Façade stand out from so many other games is that you talk to Grace and Trip by typing into the keyboard, and the characters interpret your inputs and respond accordingly. They react with elation, surprise, laughter, disgust, or even anger as you challenge their points of view, compliment them on their decisions, ask them about issues they don't want to discuss, or just outright insult them. Ultimately, depending on your actions, the game will result in one of several predefined endings. If you help the couple navigate their issues successfully, their love for one another is rekindled and they politely ask you to leave. However, like in real life, this is a difficult process to navigate and can easily slip into one of the many bad endings. Players can be ejected from the house for their treatment of the couple or other antisocial behaviour, with Trip forcing you out the door. In fact, you can even have Trip slam the door in your face at the very beginning if you successfully insult him. You can even ignore the drama that awaits and simply turn around and get back in the elevator. However, the remaining bad endings arise from your continued discussions with the couple, where Grace can decide to leave Trip or vice versa, or potentially being told to leave after nothing is resolved, only for the couple to continue to bicker and argue after you've left the apartment. Façade holds a special place in game AI history. It's a research project that achieved cult status, a quirky and eclectic game that stands out as one of the most novel applications of its time, creating this exciting and dramatically rich environment where players can interact with and shape the story as it happens, resulting in the game being downloaded over 5 million times since its release in 2005, and I suspect that number is in dire need of an update. But despite its success, the game is most certainly more famous for when it goes wrong, thanks to the agency given to the player. In the past 10 years, Façade has become infamous within YouTube and the Let's Play community, with high-profile creators such as Jacksepticeye, K-pop, The Gaming Lemon, and PewDiePie garnering millions upon millions of views for their playthroughs of the game. Its ability to react, or fail to adjust, to player behaviour ranging from the perfectly normal to the completely irrational makes for great comedic fodder. Its cult status means that many people are not aware of its game AI research origins and know it purely for the meme fodder it generates. But the game is but an early chapter in the larger story of its developers, seeking to create a fully interactive drama, and the one big step taken in making that a reality. Façade was developed by two people, Andrew Stern and Michael Mateas. Before the game began production, Stern was a game developer and designer at PF Magic in San Francisco and had worked on several entries of the highly popular Pets series. Meanwhile, Mateas was a PhD candidate at Carnegie Mellon University, and his early research at that time had been around building physical and digital avatars that expressed some form of intelligence that could build emotional connections with human users. Both were interested in the idea of autonomous interactive characters and systems, each in their own way. This led to Stern attending AI research conferences, and ultimately the pair crossed paths. Their mutual interest in intelligent avatars led them to pursue the next step: intelligent actors and the formation of the interactive drama. In 1998, emerging from a hot tub at a conference in Snowbird, Utah, Mateas and Stern decided to collaborate. As Andrew and I talked, Mateas recalls, "We sort of egged each other on to jump as far out of the mainstream as possible. They resolved to create a game that would put a knot in front of every convention of today's video game industry. They looked upon their game as a research project and figured that building it would take 2 years. It took more than 5. Their passion project was a labour of love, with no budget to speak of, and the pair worked on it around other projects, with Mateas a grad student and Stern working self-employed. The 5 years of development included 3 years spent authoring the drama itself, plus over 5 hours of recorded dialogue for Grace and Tripp provided by actors. Despite this Herculean effort, the team achieved only around 30% of what they had originally envisaged. But that was more than enough to make an impression. Released for free on Windows XP in 2005 with a macOS version in 2006, Façade became one of the most famous and successful projects of its kind. Having previously been a finalist at the 2004 Independent Games Festival, the game subsequently won the Grand Jury Prize at the Slamdance Independent Games Festival in 2006, with both Stern and Mateas garnering significant exposure, with articles written about the game in The Atlantic, The New York Times and The Guardian. Meanwhile, numerous academic publications in journals, conferences and books have been published discussing the design, development and processes behind the game itself. Not to mention all of the YouTube walkthroughs, guides and jokes that have accumulated millions of views over the years. And to date, it is still a remarkably novel application of artificial intelligence in video games, as the characters read the input typed in by the player and make attempts to respond within the established drama, with the likes of Ocelot Society's Event Zero being one of the few commercial games that explore this concept in recent years. Meanwhile, the likes of AI Dungeon has helped rekindle the public fascination with this form of mechanic, as it is used to help create and interact with the system's text adventure games. But how does all of this work? Well, in order to really understand what Façade is doing under the hood, we need to take a look at a number of connected but distinct elements of the game. First, we need to look at how Façade is structured and designed as a game, how it's built to achieve the original design goals while providing interesting challenges for AI systems to tackle. Then we need to look at how AI is employed throughout the game to help craft this drama and all the different subsystems that entails. This includes a natural language processing and understanding layer for reading and translating the player's inputs from the keyboard, a drama management system that breaks up the story into dramatic beats, allowing it to change shape and adapt to events as they happen, and a behaviour language system that allows Grace and Tripp to act as performers within the story, achieving the dramatic arc set out by the drama manager and reacting to player interaction. Let's get to it.
Oh, tonight's a special night. A celebration, in fact.
It is?
Sam, remember?
Façade was designed with the intention of crafting a character-rich plot that, based upon your interactions and conversations with other characters, it would either immediately or gradually influence how the game pans out. To achieve this, you, the player, are secretly playing along in several or what are known as social games. These social games are specific phases of Façade where, based upon your interactions, they can influence Grace and Tripp's feelings on a particular subject matter, their self-awareness about their underlying problems, and their affinity towards the player. Every provocation, criticism or praise found within the natural language typed in from the keyboard will nudge the character's feelings on each subject. All the while the game is monitoring the tensions between Grace, Tripp and the player. All of this can influence the story beats that play out, how a character responds at a particular point in time, and ultimately which ending is reached in the drama. It's important to recognise that Grace and Tripp are essentially actors, where instead of learning specific stage directions or cues for a rehearsed play, they're effectively improvising in real time as an AI stage director is putting together the play in real time. However, while it's being improvised on the fly, their performances are all pre-built and are designed to work in very specific circumstances, and the underlying challenge the two actors face is in working together in real time to ensure those pieces are put together correctly and ensure each story beat plays out successfully. To help structure this and balance out how specific topics are explored or provoked, each playthrough of Façade is broken up into two main social games, the affinity game and the therapy game. The affinity game is where the system tries to determine whose side the player is on. This is actually also running another social game within it, referred to by the developers as the hot button game. Hence, while discussing the issues Grace and Tripp are facing in their marriage, it can spill over into other more incendiary topics such as their sex life or the prospect of divorce. While this helps the player gain more backstory on each character, if you continue to push too far into a given topic, it can actually undo the affinity score you've achieved for a given character, and they will act annoyed as a result. But the second phase is where things reach their apex. The therapy game is where the player has influence over whether each character reaches self-realization about their underlying problems. If the player's actions increase the self-realization meter for that character, then specific elements will unfold. However, throughout this segment, the game itself is monitoring the supposed tension between all the actors in the scene. The state of each character and the tension in the room then impacts how the story plays out and how each character responds in the closing minutes. In order to pace and manage each of the social games within the intended drama of the story, Façade coordinates this within what's known as the Drama Manager. It figures out where the plot goes based on what's happened and what emotions each character is feeling, or rather has recorded at that time. And amongst this is the Action Behaviour Language ABL, pronounced ABLE, which encodes not just the reactions and dialogue chosen of each character in specific situations, but also how they position themselves around the room, interact with world objects, and behave in a way that fits what the drama manager wants to occur. And lastly, there is your input as the player. Façade runs an interpreter in real time that attempts to pick out the underlying sentiment of what is typed by the player, and then uses that to influence how the drama manager coordinates story beats, potentially adding new story moments, rewriting the plot as it goes, which will ultimately influence how the actors respond to you. The Drama Manager, otherwise known as a beat sequencer, decides which story beats are played out in real time during execution. It looks at the current state of the story and the characters and decides which unused beats would help move the story through the intended tension arc. Only one beat is active at any given time, and based on what's happening in the game, or rather what you're doing as you play it, it can decide to modify or change the current beat accordingly. The game has 27 main story beats, with a collection of them used in the first act to set up the tension, a handful for the collection of available endings in Act 3, and the remainder being selected for the core social games in the middle of the story. The game never uses all of the story beats in a given playthrough. Hence, while there are 27 main beats, the average playthrough only uses around 15 of them in a complete run. Each beat, much like their inspiration from dramatic theory, is designed to be the smallest narrative sequence the game can run. Each beat is then encoded in the game as a collection of what are known as Joint Dialogue Behaviours, or JDBs. These are game actions that will happen in a specific sequence in order to complete the main story beat. Each of these beats is written in the ABLE language, and we'll get into what they look like in a minute. But for now, just know that each JDB is comprised of lines of dialogue between Grace and Tripp, as well as actions for moving around the world and interacting with objects and the player. These are usually built around one topic, and only last maybe a few seconds each, but one beat can be comprised of anywhere from 10 to 100 JDBs. This allows for full plot points to be played out, such as Grace's obsession with redecorating or Tripp's attempts to force Grace to enjoy their Italian holiday. In any case, each JDB, once executed, will change one or more values of the story state, as well as the affinity each character has to the player, the tension of the story, and how close both characters are to reaching their self-realization. A typical story beat is written as a collection of specific JDBs known as beat goals. These are narrative goals that we would expect the game to play out for this beat based on specific configurations of the character's state. Essentially, each beat has written within it how the story should play out without the player's involvement. This means that a character can bring up a new topic or an existing topic that's already been covered in the current or previous story beat, and then have the two characters speak their lines. In many cases, this presents situations intended to force the player to respond in line with the social games I mentioned earlier. These situations are known as body goals. Plus, the ability to wait for the player to respond, also known as a wait goal, and how to transition out of the story beat based on the input, which is the transition out. This transition will occur either because the player didn't respond to it, or a specific behavioural trigger happens because of something the player said. Now, it's important that the structure of these narrative beat goals don't change, otherwise it runs risk of breaking the flow of the story. But the drama manager needs to be able to interject so player input can be responded to. To do this, the system can use a special JDB known as a beat mix-in. Beat mix-ins enable the drama manager to change what future beat goals are going to be executed. It can add a new beat goal to address a specific point made by the player, remove an upcoming beat so that the story can change direction, or reorder future beats so that topics that were lined up for discussion later are brought forward to now. Normal beat mix-ins only change what's happening in that main story beat, but there is also the global mix-in, which is designed to bring new topics into the conversation. None of these are directly related to the main story, and are considered satellite topics, which are in orbit around the main plot and independent of the flow of the narrative. This can include discussing the objects in the house, such as the furniture, Grace's ornaments, the couple's wedding photo, or the view from the apartment, to more delicate topics such as Grace and Tripp's sex life or whether they're receiving therapy. Each of these mix-ins add in whole new discussions that have 3 tiers of discourse, which are only revealed depending on how much you dig into them in a way that the characters respond to. These global mix-ins allow characters to acknowledge your behaviour, including things like praising or even flirting with them, and react in some form or another and then get back to the main story. The drama manager is always retaining a memory of what the core storyline is, so when interrupted with a mix-in, it can get back on point. In fact, you can even interrupt a mix-in with another mix-in and the game will eventually get you back to the main narrative. When a main story beat is interrupted by a mix-in, the drama manager can decide whether to restart the last beat goal it attempted, or return to where it was during the execution. This is actually handled within the JDB itself, where specific gist points are assigned that declare once the player reaches a specific point in the story, they've clearly got the gist, and it can resume the beat goal if interrupted because you, the player, know what the point of the conversation is. If the gist point wasn't reached, or there isn't one for that beat, then it will restart from the beginning. As mentioned, there are 27 main story beats within Façade. In order to flesh those out and bring them to life, there are approximately 2,500 joint dialogue behaviours written into the game, handling all the different directions that the story can take. Of these 2,500, only around 66% of them are beat goals and mix-ins, with the remainder catering to the global mix-in progressions that allow the game to more dynamically react to player behaviour. So now we know how Façade builds and maintains its story through the drama manager, how do Grace and Tripp tell the story? As we just discussed, the drama manager's joint dialogue behaviours, or JDBs, are written in the Behaviour language. A behaviour language is based on an existing agent behavioural language called HAP, developed in the mid-1990s, but the key part is that Able handles multi-agent coordination, and therein lies the great secret of Façade. Grace and Tripp are working together to put on a performance for the player, and are communicating between one another the whole time you're playing. The JDBs within the drama manager are all written in Able as collections of actions to execute. Some of these actions are designed to respond to events in the world, while others solve specific goals given to a character to complete. Consider the opening of the game, where you knock on the door and wait to be invited into the apartment. This is a sequential behaviour for Tripp encoded in Able, where first he needs to wait for a knock on the door to occur, followed by that he'll let out a little sigh, then 2 sub-goals that are then satisfied, opening the door and then greeting the guest. Able actions have conditions that need to be met before one variation of the chosen action can be executed, and effects are computed as a result of successful completion. If we consider the open door behaviour, the character needs to find the door that was knocked upon and compute the distance. If they're close enough, they'll answer the door. If not, there is a fallback behaviour to tell the player to open it and come in the house. Sub-goals often have more than one way to complete them. Hence you might see Grace and Tripp execute the same behaviour in slightly different ways between each playthrough depending on where they are and what's happening at that time. Meanwhile, once Tripp has successfully opened the door and welcomed the guest, it deletes the fact that there was a knock on the door from the WME, the working memory element of the character. This stores all the knowledge Tripp has of the world at that time. This is of course to stop him trying to answer the door again if you tried knocking on it. This actually shares a lot of similarities with planning systems and languages that we've seen numerous times on AI in games. First in the inaugural episode on Fear by Monolith, but also when we've looked at games like Transformers Fall of Cybertron and Horizon Zero Dawn. But unlike those games, there is a greater emphasis on tightly coordinated execution between Grace and Trip that those games either don't account for or outright cheat to achieve. While Trip inviting you into the house is a single sequential behaviour, a situation such as Trip making drinks at the bar is a joint behaviour, and the crux from which the JDBs inside the Drama Manager are built from. Grace and Trip are secretly synchronising their entry into the behaviour and taking turns playing their part, sharing a working memory element at the same time. Trip offers you a drink and will walk to the bar, continuing the discussion, and prepares the drinks if he makes it there. Meanwhile, Grace will roll her eyes and interject, making comments about his cocktail shakers, forcing Trip to argue with her. Grace and Trip secretly signal to one another what actions they are going to commit and agree to participate together or reject the action if they're unable to complete the request. This is all carefully synchronised, and actions can't be executed until they agree on whether they will work together or not. Hence, you'll notice they very rarely talk over one another. Sometimes actions will go smoothly and hit the end of the beat goal as planned, while others require numerous fallbacks in the sub-goals to achieve the desired effect. It actually has a lot more in common with the likes of professional wrestling, where the performers know the end goal they want to reach, but how it's executed is based on how the world is configured at that time and they adapt to suit. As I mentioned before, the Drama Manager has the mix-in behaviours ready for how to address the player's inputs in the world or from the text systems. But how does that get fed into the Able system? Well, each behaviour can have handlers in place that allows for them to execute slightly differently depending on how things are panning out. Like, say if you walk into the apartment before Trip invites you in, then he won't invite you in anymore. Meanwhile, if you ask where Grace is before he yells for her, this will prompt him to move that action forward to be executed now, or if he's already done it, he'll point that out. In amongst all this are special cross-beat behaviours. While the story beats are assigned specific joint behaviours as goals to execute, the characters can still make decisions for themselves that span across a particular story beat or into the next one. This is mostly of use when the characters are executing staging requests, meaning that they're moving around the apartment for dramatic effect. If you once again consider the opening minute when you're invited in, the two characters move into positions around the apartment either together or individually based on what's happening, and those movement actions can happen while other dialogue behaviours are being executed. The last big element of Façade to talk about is the system for reading in the player's keyboard inputs. This is what's known in artificial intelligence as a natural language processing and understanding problem. And while the technology behind this has made significant strides in more recent years, with commercial-grade voice and text recognition technology becoming more commonplace, this was a major problem for Façade to try and overcome 20 years ago, and the resulting system cuts several corners, which is perfectly understandable given the immensity of the task it's trying to solve. Façade's language processing is broken down into two phases. First, it maps text to one of around 30 discourse acts, recognising that the player is, for example, criticising or flirting with a specific character. And then once the discourse act is established, it then maps this to a JDB in the Drama Manager and is injected into the game. Figuring out the discourse act is done through a series of rules, which recognise typical utterances and statements of the player. There are around 800 rules built into Façade, allowing it to recognise behaviour ranging from greetings, expressions of particular emotions, confusion, apologies, criticism, praise, and much more. All of these rules are handwritten and are designed to transform a specific sentence into a corresponding JDB for the Drama Manager. The rules are often fairly complex, given they need to differentiate positional facts from compliments, multiple facts in the same sentence, double negatives such as saying "I'm not bad" when you actually mean "I'm good." Plus, the system can recognise around 1,000 idioms typically used in the English language, ranging from calling something a piece of cake to telling someone to hold their tongue. The system is designed to compile down into Jess, a rule engine written in Java, translating the roughly 800 rules into approximately 6,800 Jess rules for runtime execution. And this is but one of the many content bottlenecks Façade suffers from, but it's the one that players often spot first. Given that despite over 800 rules in place to recognise statements from players, There are so many nuances within the English language that are still not successfully captured and would require hundreds more rules to successfully grasp. What is interesting is that, in what appears to be a stylistic choice by the authors, the system allows for a lot of false positives to be accepted, whereby it will incorrectly interpret what the player says to mean something else. As mentioned in a research paper by Mateas and Stern published in 2004, it was more important for the system to make some sort of response rather than ignore the user's input and do nothing at all. In addition, the system fails to grasp any nuance in the text typed, and instead focuses on the more literal elements provided. The developers believed that, when played as intended, the system should still generate a response, even if that response reads the situation wrong or just results in the character looking confused. It's argued that one of the benefits of the scenario is that given Grace and Tripp are written as upper middle class, it's in character that they don't really understand when people use slang terms or shout obscenities in a positive way. But ultimately, the authors themselves acknowledge that the system is not robust enough to survive people trying to break it, which has essentially led to the rather fun and bizarre YouTube Let's Plays over the years.
Right. You know what, Andrew? I'm going to ask you something.
It's been almost 15 years since the release of Façade, and Stern and Mateas have gone on to numerous other projects, with Stern co-founding Playable Studios, developing a variety of VR and AR applications for the likes of the NBA, the NFL and Hasbro, as well as conversational bots for the likes of Amazon Alexa. Meanwhile, Mateas continued his career in academia, becoming a professor first at Georgia Institute of Technology, followed by his current position as a professor of computational media at the University of California, Santa Cruz since 2006. As a result, there was never a follow-up or sequel to Façade. While Stern and Mateas originally sought to produce a follow-up project called The Party, announced back in 2006, it was confirmed in 2013 that the pair were no longer working on it. The immensity of the task faced is something that cannot be understated. I've thrown several big numbers at you throughout this video, be it the number of natural language interpreter rules, the story beats, JDBs, and much more. Not only did the overarching systems have to be developed in order for it to work in the first place, but all of this content was developed by just 2 people, in order to create what is ultimately a 20-minute experience. It's an interesting hot pot of tools, systems, and languages that has never really been reproduced in the same way, largely I suspect because of the literal years taken to build it. But all that said, Façade is an important research and cultural milestone, a game that left an indelible mark on video games and AI research, creating an experience that is still unique to this day. While it has been cited in academic texts for well over 10 years now, arguably its biggest impact is that people know what it is outside of the academic conference circuit, achieving Mateas and Stern's vision of creating a game that sits outside of the norms of the games industry and becoming a piece of art in its own right. Thanks for watching this episode of AI in Games. This episode was voted for by my crowdfunding supporters on Patreon. To have your say and help support the show, please consider joining via the links on screen and in the description, with a special shout out to Firesteel, Mark Drew and ScrappyDev142. I'll be back soon with episode 50, and we've got something special lined up for you there. Take care folks, I'll be back.
Yeah.
And no, Andrew, you don't need to say anything more.
You feel like you ruined everything from the start.